When I started photographing in 2008, most of the pictures that I was taking were just snapshots about the world around me. I wasn't really putting much thought into the pictures. Only when I started my photography studies in 2014, that was when I actually understood that being intentional in the pictures that you were taking is essential in creating a narrative, a storyline in your pictures. And this actually didn't mean that I would take more pictures to create the storyline. It meant that when I was about to photograph, when I went out and saw details or things that I wanted to capture, it actually meant that I already knew what I needed in order to create a coherent storyline. I wouldn't be looking back to see whether I had all the pictures and why am I having so many broad landscape pictures but no close-ups. So I wouldn't have these issues when creating my series because I already knew what pictures I wanted to take and how to really build the storyline around the topic that I was photographing. And I actually wanted to try this out with you. If I would give you these two photographs and tell you to add one more photograph to tell a story, which one of these images would you choose? Now let's look into what kind of story did you create. If you chose the option A, you're most likely creating a very visual, clear story to your audience, actually showing the things that you want to tell. Now, if you chose the option B, you're someone who likes to create suspense in your storyline, similar to that you see in movies, emphasizing more emotions in your images. And if you chose the option C, your photographs work almost like symbols, maybe representing something that is not always tangible or possible to visualize, giving the viewer something to really ponder and think about when they look at your images. Now that wasn't hard, was it? But what if you would have to create this storyline from scratch? It is easy to just add one image and see the whole storyline change. What if you would have a topic that you would have to document and you're really not clear how to create a beginning and ending and really this thin line that connects all the images together? How would you go about that? And where would you start? First thing is definitely knowing what you're going to photograph. This is easy if you were given maybe an assignment, so you have somewhat clear understanding on what it is you want to photograph. But if you would have to create the idea from scratch on your own, you would need to know quite instantly what you want to photograph. When I was studying photography, we were not getting any sorts of support in choosing the topic, but we would have to really dig deep into what topics we were interested in, and then we would have to rationalize the topic to our teachers to tell them why the specific theme or topic is interesting to us and why we want to continue in pursuing that. Starting with a topic that you're really interested in or maybe even already familiar with. So for instance, for me, photographing sports was not interesting at all. And I did have some gigs to photograph sports events, and I really understood that the reason my images weren't really what I wanted them to be was that I didn't have the creative freedom to go about the whole event, but I had to deliver specific sorts of images because it was a paid job. Well, in paid jobs, maybe there is less room to move, to be creative. When I started to photograph, I really understood quickly that I enjoyed photographing people a lot. And the reason for this was that I would always get to know them better. I would hear about their experiences, about their stories, but I would also have the freedom to move and to create at my own pace, because usually my subjects wouldn't have a specific goal in mind, what they wanted the pictures to look like. So I could actually really try out and experiment when I was photographing them. They never had the urgency or hurry to get it over with, so I would always have the time to try out and see what things were resonating with me. So photographing people for me, it was really all about how could I capture their character, how would they move naturally, whether they were shy or whether they had something else that was really interesting in their character, and trying to create the images around these specific things. So when you're choosing the topic, maybe ask yourself, what are the things that you're already interested in? If you don't want to photograph only one person or a specific thing, maybe then dive more deeper into photographing groups of people. So people who are doing something specific. When we were on our study trip in 2017, we went to Bratislava, Slovakia, and we had to have a specific plan before we went there. And I just decided decided, because I'm from Finland and ice swimming is huge here, I had to do some digging around ice swimming in Bratislava. Everybody in our class had a specific topic to photograph, which they already did plan, and they were in contact with the people. And when we arrived there was a week time to photograph a specific series. I wanted to photograph ice swimmers, and specifically this one group called 𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻, which in translation means the ice bears. And it was a very intense week where almost on a daily basis I was seeing someone from the group and photographing their swimming rehearsals. Like, I had a lot of ideas and I just wanted to photograph everyone and everything that I got in contact with. Just choosing the topic and then diving really head deep into it was my way of really creating a coherent series. And in the end, I think I had like maybe 500 pictures, so there was a lot of pictures to choose from. And the most difficult part for me actually became the editing process, where I needed to choose which pictures were really communicating the topic and the people that were in the group without it becoming too overwhelming to present. The easiest way to start is to start documenting the people that you're with already and the surroundings that you're in already, because that is something that you see on a daily basis. You can really take your time in capturing those things, and you don't need to stress too much about whether they're coming out well or not, because whenever you actually decide to photograph someone or you make a plan with someone, there will instantly be this different sort of pressure to produce these images and really get them out perfectly. You probably already have some sort of pull towards a specific topic. I would see this as a compass that will take you to the right direction when you're trying to decide which way to take or which themes to really dig into. The second thing is decide what kind of techniques are you going to use when you are photographing. In my series 𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐻, but also in my other series like 𝐒𝐬𝐬 and Little Russia, I used a certain types of techniques that would be either bringing out a very enthusiastic mood or maybe a bit of a melancholic mood in the pictures. And even if I didn't choose a technique for each picture on their own, I would sort of have this plan around what kind of series I was building. Maybe I would be taking pictures really freely, but I would have a understanding of what sort of images I would be building the whole series on. For example, if you look at this series of Little Russia, this series was created about my grandfather and his companion in his latest years. The whole series was about the sadness that was really present when I visited them and all the small details and symbols that I would be seeing when I was documenting them and their lives. Also, I knew that I needed to capture details so that I could communicate even deeper and clearer what kind of surrounding they were living in their last years. And of course, it was also about their connection or the lack of it, because when they got older, it was obvious for people who were present to see that their connection was really not quite there, and it was mostly about just surviving on a day-to-day basis. The tip that I really think is important when thinking about techniques and really looking at your series or the things that you're about to photograph, that you can use specific, let's say, compositional rules or maybe technical rules that you want to create your images around. I feel like it's really important to know the rules in photography. Knowing compositional or technical rules and just building imagery around that will only then give you this feeling of completion around the images that you created. So I think that you should definitely be introduced to them, but then going about your photography without really thinking about these rules is where you really build that personal style. Also seeing that, okay, maybe you are more prone to photograph horizontally or using leading lines in your pictures, that is okay, but specifically being very aware of doing this when you are photographing, I feel that will just create very perfect images. You would have all these rules in place, but you might be missing out on the storyline that you want to tell. So using like rule of thirds is a great way to understand like the balance in your pictures. But if you're only using that in your images, you might lose this personal creative input in your images. And for me personally, I didn't understand whether I actually enjoyed the outcome, the actual picture that I got, because I was trying so hard to create images that were just perfect based on all of these photography rules. I do love to use a lot of negative space in my images because I love to create the feeling of isolation, being completely separate from everything else, and having this space for the viewer to see the actual focus point, which is the subject in my images, but also for the subject to feel that they have space to move, to be themselves, and to have a bit of a deeper connection with the subject. Because if there's a lot of things happening, or it feels like the image is really packed or cramped, or there is movement around you and you cannot really concentrate, I feel that it's definitely not only affecting you as the photographer, but also your subject, because they cannot focus on letting loose, feeling comfortable, and just being present in the moment that you are photographing them. In the past, I've also used a lot of leading lines in my images, and I feel that it is a great way to balance your images out. It will definitely create something like a graphic element in your pictures. Instead of seeing clear leading lines like roads or walls or roofs, I would really look more deeper into lines that are created with objects and things that are not as visible, because in this way you're still having these leading lines in your pictures, but you are focusing more on the subject or the story that you want to tell instead of the compositional techniques to bring out emotions in the viewer. But if you're not interested in using compositional elements in your pictures, you can always use exposure techniques such as silhouettes, which can really build a stunning picture. I don't feel like silhouettes really bring out the character in your subject if you are photographing people, but it does bring out a very frozen moment in time, and the image becomes almost like a memory. So it's not an image that is documenting your subject, but it's almost like a filler image that you are adding into the series as a whole. I mean, for me, silhouettes really communicate mystique, maybe some sort of loneliness too in a way. Once you're familiar with the exposure triangle and the manual mode is no stranger to you anymore, I do suggest that adjusting your exposure to either high or low exposure, you can really deepen the communication and what sort of feeling you're bringing into your images. And having so-called moods in your images is a great way to tell the story. So you don't always have to visually show something, but you can, through lighting, you can always communicate a different mood or the changing in mood. And number 3 is using symbols to strengthen your story. Instead of always photographing what you actually see, what is visible, and photographing as it is, another great way to communicate a specific storyline or adding to a storyline is to create symbolism in your images. You can either create it by placing specific objects in the picture to communicate a specific story to the viewer, which they're not always really aware of, but when you are photographing something, you are knowingly communicating something to the viewer. So by choosing the elements that you are photographing, knowing that a specific element needs to be in a picture and then moving it, which is obviously then not purely documentary photos, but doing this, you are more in charge of what is the message that you're conveying to the viewer. Another way of communicating a specific message through symbolism is definitely by composing your image in a specific way. So let's say, for instance, because we're talking about portrait photography, photographing someone from below will always give them more power and will create this feeling of them being powerful and above you, or maybe be in a very powerful position. On the other hand, if you're photographing somebody and you are above them and you're photographing down onto them, you're actually making them seem very powerless and maybe submissive and maybe in a position in life that is not very beneficial to them. Like in this picture of Larry Sultan from the series Intimate Structures, you can almost sense this feeling of deep loneliness, even if you're also simultaneously seeing a wedding photo on the nightstand. The careful placement of the blood pressure device, which the viewer can't instantly see, really reminds us of the passage of time and how the people in the image, once young and carefree, are facing a different chapter in their lives, which is maybe disguised in comfort and security of a nice home and seeming wealth. Or in this one, which is created by Martin Parr, we have a scenery of this beautiful, magnificent view, and you can see the other person really truly appreciating the view and documenting it, getting out of the car, capturing the moment and seeing it with their own eyes, while simultaneously we can see their spouse having the same opportunity to be present and really choosing to place her attention into a very trivial subject, which is celebrities and their very uninteresting lives. And the image in its simplicity has this beautiful and powerful contrast, and showing the viewer really that every minute we have a choice to make where we are placing our attention to. And even if Parr wasn't intentionally trying to create this contrast, he has the eye for detail to notice these very minor events that are happening and taking place around him. And even if somehow there is sadness in the image, there is also a lot of humor, because life is mostly very humorous if we decide to see it through that lens. So instead of photographing only exactly what you see in front of you, we as photographers always have the power to decide how to portray the people and the environment that we're seeing. So do you want to capture things as they are, or do you want to create your own story around things that you're experiencing?